Ooh, I got the thumbs up, and it's like almost exactly time. How about that? And I wasn't even in the middle of telling a weird story or anything. People watching at home are going to be very confused. Make sure, hey, Craig, ring the dinner bell. Let them know we're starting. Ding-a-ding-a-ding. All right, cool. Maybe next week I'll remember to actually bring it. What's up? Yeah, yeah. Usually I would suggest waiting a couple minutes, but it's all right. We can close them now. I'm just, yeah. Well, good morning, class. Happy to be here with you all today. Are you guys happy as well? I'll let you know. I did ask if we wanted to stop at the Tower of Babel or if we want to continue on in Genesis. I've had 3 votes so far out of the roughly hundreds and hundreds of people that come to this class. And those 3 all said they want to continue. So if you feel strongly otherwise, you better let me know, because otherwise next week we're just going on. So we're studying Genesis, as you well know. And did the other class wrap up? Is it done? Okay. Then I really need a review today, huh? Okay. Because I know maybe some of you, but maybe not all of you, have been watching week on week to be current with the class. So the book of Genesis, the title means it's the book of beginnings. And of course, we could say it's the beginning of the world. That's totally true. We get the story of creation twice, but it's the same story. It's just told from 2 different angles with 2 different perspectives. And this is a very Hebrew way of doing things. It is why, if you were in my Revelation class, you saw the end of the world happen like 3 times or so over the course of Revelation. Linearly, the world won't end 3 times, right? But each time was pointed at a different angle, and it was talking about different intensities, and, it's fine. Some people are linear storytellers. I find sometimes if I'm trying to, tell my wife, let's say, what's going on in a show that I've been watching that I really like, it's hard sometimes to do it linearly, right? Because you'll start and you'll tell them the main plot, but then there's a side character who's important in the main plot, but if you don't really understand what they did already in the side plot, then you don't understand what they're doing in the main plot, so then you got to go back and cycle and talk about the side plot, but then you got to come back to the main, you know what I'm saying? So I think the Hebrew way of telling stories is very much that as well, where they're trying to get you a rounded view of things, oftentimes from multiple perspectives. Because the truth contained in Scripture is multifaceted, I guess is the way to say that, right? Like when Jesus tells a parable, in fact, I'm going to preach on a parable today. When Jesus tells a parable, if you just take away one little moral from it, you're probably missing other things that Jesus is doing in that story. And oftentimes our sort of Sunday school way of operating is we'll say, the story of the Good Samaritan is that everybody's your neighbor, right? But actually, you need to read that parable 3 or 4 times consecutively. Look at it from the perspective of the Samaritan. Look at it from the perspective of, I don't know, the guy who owns the inn. Look at it from the perspective of the guy who's fallen on the road. Think about, and each of those is going to reveal to you not conflicting truths, just different truths from the same story, because that's why Jesus told a story instead of just saying one simple statement. Make sense? Okay, cool. So I was saying that the book of Genesis is a book of beginnings. Of course, we got the story of creation. We also got the beginning of mankind, right, in Adam and Eve. And we will, along the way, further down the road, we're going to get the story of the beginnings of the nation of Israel. We haven't got there yet. Just to give you kind of a high-level view, hey, would you make sure that the people at home are seeing what they need to see right now? It's okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, just click through the first and second slides. It's okay. So anyways, it's the beginning of the nation of Israel. And just to give you kind of that high-level view, the first prophecy of Jesus is given to Adam and Eve as God promises to Eve that her seed will, her offspring will stomp the head of the snake, basically, right? So that's sort of the first messianic prophecy. And Adam and Eve are given the command to be fruitful and multiply. And then we get to Noah, the story we just did recently. And again, as they're leaving the ark, they get the command to be fruitful and multiply. When we get to Abraham, we're going to get this prophecy about being made into a great nation and that all the nations of the world will be blessed through him. And if we understand it rightly, this is a continuation of the prophecy about the coming Messiah. Timeline, in brief. Adam and Eve, people multiply, but by the time of Noah, wickedness abounds so much that God starts over with Noah and his family. From Noah, we're going to draw a straight line, basically, to Abraham. And then from Abraham, and you'll see that in the genealogies coming up at the end of the Tower of Babel. From Abraham, he's the father of Isaac. Isaac is the father of Jacob and Esau. Jacob, after wrestling with an angel, gets his name changed to Israel. Anybody know what Israel means? Struggles with or wrestles with God. That's what Israel means. His name gets changed to Israel. He has a whole mess of kids. Amongst them are people like Reuben and Dan and Judah and Asher, right? So names you might recognize as the tribes of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel, right? They're actually named after those sons. One of those sons who doesn't get a tribe named after him is a young man by the name of Joseph, not the stepfather of Jesus, the other Joseph. And it's because of Joseph and his relationship to the Pharaoh that eventually Abraham's, Isaac's, Jacob's family winds up in Egypt. Fast forward 400 years, and we're up to Moses. Does it all make sense? Okay. All that's ahead of us. We talked about the growing problem of sin. God was grieved at how bad the world got. And I suggested to you that the description of violence abounding in the world, wicked violence, we were careful to articulate that there are sometimes just causes for violence, right? If you're defending somebody else, protection of life, that sort of thing. It's never good, but sometimes it's the best thing you can do in the situation. But the preponderance of violence described before the flood came ultimately rooted in selfishness and selfish desire. And we saw that in the character of Lamech, right? He was the last named character to have any kind of a story before the flood happened. And Lamech was like, hey, wives, because he had two, which biblically is almost never a good sign. I'm pretty great. I hope you know. And I am so great that if people wound me, I will kill them back. In fact, if the vengeance that God has for Cain is sevenfold, my vengeance will be 77-fold. So you can see he's putting himself in a place of even greater authority or commanding greater respect and certainly greater retribution than God himself. So that wickedness is populating throughout the earth, and wickedness fundamentally comes down to selfishness. Why do we steal? Because we think we should have what somebody else has. Why do we lie, or why do we speak badly about others? Because we want for ourselves, right? Why do we kill? Why did Cain kill, right? Jealousy, right? He wanted the position of Abel without the necessary sacrifice that would go along with that. He wanted it for himself. So God floods the world, but he spares Noah. He commands Noah and his family to build an ark. And somebody remind me, what is an ark? Good job. It's a box. It's a box. It's not a boat because it lacks the things that a boat needs, right? It has no steering. It has no propulsion. Noah is not the captain of the boat. Noah and his family are cargo in a shipping container, basically. who is the captain of the boat? I mean, if it was a boat, yeah, it'd be God, right? God directs it. God designed it. He brought all the animals onto the ark, or he brought them all to Noah. Noah brought them onto the ark. And how long was Noah on the ark for? Do you remember? Before he was able to get out? A little over a year, about a year and 10 days. We always think about the flood lasting for 40 days and 40 nights. That's how long it rained. But Noah was confined, and all of the animals, which includes predators and prey, were confined to the ark for over a year. And your reaction to that could be one of two things. Either one, pretty impossible, so this story is probably a metaphor or something, a fable, but not really true. That's one response people might have. Because I believe that these are true stories that happened in real history, have a counter for you. God was doing miracles on that ark, the kind of miracles we see him do elsewhere as well. So on the one hand, the kind of miracle we see with Daniel in the lion's den, right? Where the hungry lions, God shuts their mouths. On the other hand, I think there's also probably a miracle of providence, right? Noah brings food onto the ark. I can't imagine that it was enough for all of God's creatures for a year. Yeah. Like he planted seeds? Maybe. But again, we are past that time in history when everything is vegetarian. Right? That was true before the fall into sin. But after the fall into sin, now there are carnivores and predators. Right? So what I think is happening is God is providing for them in miraculous ways. I think the same sort of miracle we see where Jesus feeds the 5,000. It's 5,000 men. It's probably more like feeding the 12,000 or something like that. The same sort of multiplication of food. And we see this in the widow of Zarephath, and we see this, we see it a number of places. So I think there's some miracles going on in the ark that are sort of implied, but not called out. Once the floodwaters recede enough and the ark comes to rest and they eventually are able to come out of the ark, does anybody remember what the very first thing that Moses does? Yeah, he builds an altar and he sacrifices. You'll remember he brought 2 of every kind of animal onto the ark except for the clean animals. He brought 7 pairs of clean animals. So it is completely reasonable that I don't know which ones he sacrificed, but it was from those clean animals he brought onto the ark that he would sacrifice to the Lord. Now, I think it's worthwhile knowing, how long have people been sacrificing to God in the Bible? Who were the first people to do it? Adam and Eve, maybe, but definitely Cain and Abel, right? And already Abel is sacrificing his livestock. However, people had not been given permission to eat animals yet, right? So those sacrifices were presented wholly to God. Noah does one such sacrifice where he, sacrifices wholly to God. And then God says, yes, and I covenant with you and all the living creatures that have the breath of life in them. I covenant with all of you that I will never again do what I did this time. And I will keep the planet running until it's time for the planet to end. And to Moses, he said, just as I gave you all the fruit of the trees to eat before, now I give to you all animals. You can eat animals. So this is new. And he says, just don't eat them with the blood in them. Otherwise, they're all for you. From there, we moved into some genealogy. And then I almost forgot a really important part of the Noah story. What did I forget? It's on every nursery that people paint God says, see, I've set my bow in the sky. bow being the same word that is used for the weapon. It's not it's not like you tie your shoes in a bow. Like, a weapon of war. He says, see, behold, I set my bow in the sky as a sign to you, right? A sign that I'll never destroy the world like that again. We went over last week the genealogies of we got to get to that too. The last story we get from Noah himself is Noah plants a vineyard. And you know what you do with a vineyard? You grow grapes. And he winds up making some wine. And on one occasion, he gets intoxicated, and he is laying in his tent exposed. And one of his sons comes in, and it seems that his response to that is mockery. And he goes and fetches his brothers so that they can all have a laugh at Dad's expense. Well, the other two brothers are not into that, so instead they, with a lot of care and dignity, walk backwards in and cover him up so they don't have to see that. And when Noah wakes up, he knows what happened, and he offers blessings to the other two sons and not to Ham. To him, he says, basically, because you've done this, you will be lesser than the other two. You will be a servant to the other two. And I suggested to you that, as far as curses go, that's not really terrible. I mean, he doesn't curse him with like death or loneliness or anything like that. And in fact, this might actually point to some discernment about what it takes to be a good leader, to have authority over people. What Ham did was he saw somebody who was vulnerable, and he thought to exploit him for his own amusement. Whereas the other two saw somebody who was vulnerable, and they had compassion and took care of them. And you could understand why Moses would say, I keep saying Moses, Noah, they both had arcs. They're just different arcs, right? Moses had 2 arcs, but we'll come to that later. You could see Noah thinking that, the one who exploits the weak has no right being an authority. You need those who will care for and protect those who are vulnerable, even if it was their own fault. That brings us to the end of the story of Noah. Then we get some genealogies. And the thing that you should hopefully have picked up from the genealogies is that the folks who are descended from Japheth tend to have a somewhat neutral relationship with Israel in the future. The folks descended from Ham are going to be the antagonists we see throughout the Old Testament. The people that are at war with Israel most of the time. They're all descendants of Ham. And amongst them, you get names like Cush, Egypt, Canaan. And you think, well, Canaan's the land of the Promised Land. Yes, which the Israelites had to come in and conquer because it was full of people that opposed them. You get Nineveh. You get Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Arkites, Sinites maybe, Arvidites. So like Sodom and Gomorrah, you get, so all these names that have negative connotations for Bible readers. All right. We got a genealogy from Shem that led us up to, but diverged from, the lineage of Abraham. We're going to get Abraham after this story. But that brings us up to Genesis chapter 11, a story that I've been looking forward to talking with you all about. It's a story that's probably somewhat familiar. You might even know all the details, but let's still explore it with some care and hopefully get some insights. So, Genesis 11, verse 1. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. I hope I said that word right. It's a weird word. Okay, you might not think we have anything to say yet, but we already have things to say. Do you know that when God commands, or when God tells people how to build altars to him in the Old Testament, that he has some instructions on what it should be made out of? Altars built to the Lord were to be of uncut stone. Now, I don't think that worked stone or bricks are an abomination to God. If you have a brick house, I don't think this is a problem. But there might be a good reason why God says uncut stone. Why would builders, even today, prefer to work with brick rather than raw, uncut stone? It goes together easier. Why? Why does it go together easier? Even sides, yeah. It is shaped by man for his purposes, right? You could even say it's created by man, which is a bit of an overstatement, right? Because, like, where'd the clay come from? But, it's a human artifice, right? And it's designed for man's purposes. And as with so many things that humans make, it strips out natural complexity for the sake of simplicity, right? Let me ask you, just an aesthetic question. And you don't have to give me the answer I want. You should just think about it for yourself. Which one do you think is more interesting and beautiful? Natural stone or a fabricated brick? Was it? Natural stone. Yeah, of course. There is something to this, right? And I don't want to make too much of it. But I think you can see in this divergence between, shaped brick and found rock, the idea of man taking more and more control over the project, right? Bricks are artificial and uniform. And with them, you're able to construct. I mean, look, we are a Lego household, okay? I can appreciate some uniformity in size and shape because you can do stuff. But anyways, just hold that in your mind, and then we're just going to keep going. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." This right here is probably the most insight we're given in the whole story as to what's going on in the story. And I think we have to be careful that we don't overreach. But these Old Testament stories, especially the very old ones, are told in such a tight way, so succinctly, that I think you really do have to peer into it a little bit and try and understand what it's saying. So at a very basic level, what is the reason they're building this tower? Don't make it up for yourself. Read it out of the text. For themselves. For what purpose? I'm sorry, say again. So they'll be remembered. Good. And what's the other reason? So the reach in the heavens might be part of it. I want to do some interpretation on what that could mean. Yeah, we talked about making a name for ourselves. What was the last bit of the verse there? Right. Yeah, so for their fame and also to make sure that people don't spread out too far. I want to start at the most mundane and then we'll work our way up to bigger, grander things, okay? So I would say that idea of the tower stretching up to the heavens, when you read biblical stuff, it's important that you're careful. Because we have two concepts that aren't necessarily the same, but they use the same language. And in the ancient mind, they might not be that pull-apartable. Is there a difference between heaven and the heavens? What is the difference? Okay, the heavens would be the sky, and heaven is like the place of God. And that makes sense to us. And that distinction, especially to our modern minds, makes total sense. Because we can say, well, yes, I've been in the heavens, right? I've flown on a plane. But I've never been to heaven in the sense that it's the proper place of God where his throne is and the angels are. And like maybe that's a one-day thing, but like today, no. Unfortunately, the language isn't that tidy. So it's often an editor's choice whether they're going to say the heavens or heaven, because the language is almost indistinguishable. So, and if you're an ancient person particularly, who's definitely never been in an airplane, it's easy enough to conflate those two ideas, right? That God is in the sky. So what are they building a tower to? Let's start at the most mundane. If they're just building it to the sky in a generic, non-theological way, well, that makes sense if it's supposed to be a beacon to rally people from all over the world, right? Oh, if it's tall enough, then no matter where you are, you know where it is, and you can go, right? So if that's the way that it's meant, then it's still a testament to their own glory. Right? Hey, look at what we've achieved. And it's meant to draw all people to there. And that sounds sort of utopian, It is, in a sense, globalist, right? The idea that we're going to unite all people under one banner in one city. We're never... we're just always going to be one. And there are a lot of secular people in our world today who believe this vision can be realized. A world without borders, a world where we all belong together, where we all share the same common language, where we all become... look, this is the vision put forth in Star Trek of what would happen to planet Earth, right? There's no United States of America in Star Trek. It's just Earth. There's something really nice about that vision. You'd imagine an end to warfare. Much like how the vision of communism is a world in which we are all equally valued and we all care for each other. Sounds really good. But when you look at how it's played out anywhere it's ever been tried in the world, strict, complete communism, it never works out that way. Why not? Because everybody involved is a sinner. And the fundamental problem of sin is self-interest. And I'll tell you, man, you might be able to run a little commune with 2 or 3 families. As soon as you get more people than you personally know, it gets really, really hard to say, I'm going to take food from my kid and give it to yours. So I think that's sort of the vision here, right? Like we would all be together, kumbaya, but the vision that God laid out when he made Adam and Eve, and then again released Noah and his family from the ark, seems to be the opposite. We've got a big old world to spread out and enjoy. And if the goal here is attracting everybody to their civilization, then that picture we talked about with the bricks versus the stone is getting played out in people's lives. Rather than enjoying this big, great world with all its diversity and all of its space that God has designed for it, we're just all going to cluster in the place that we have built for ourselves. Does this make sense? I'm not saying God's anti-city. Like, I'm not saying that. In fact, the vision of where God's people will reside in eternity is the New Jerusalem, right? So, don't get it wrong. It's just a matter of these guys are trying to chart a course for themselves that's properly counter to the vision that God laid out for them, and that's the problem, right? So maybe that's like the most mundane version. Is it's a beacon to try and draw all the people of the earth together, so we can craft for ourselves a utopian place to be. You know the name utopia? It's a Greek. It's a made-up word. It's a new word. It's only been around for like 100 years or so, but it's sort of a double entendre, right? Because the word "you" has the sense of good, right? Like euphoria, good feeling. But actually, the way it's spelled, it's "u," which is the word for no or not. Because utopia is a place that can't exist. So it would be the most mundane version, but what if by heavens, they didn't just mean really tall? Because I think the place that a lot of y'all went to in your minds is, much like the woman in the Led Zeppelin song, they're trying to build a stairway to heaven, right? What would the purpose of that be then? Building a tower that would reach heaven. Why would anybody want to do that? To make themselves equal to God, yeah. Or at least as a Lutheran, right, I'm going to say, well, they're trying to have an alternate pathway to God, other than the pathway that God's made, right? But I think that wanting to grasp equality with God is certainly, it's the same problem that Adam and Eve had, right? They approached the tree. They desired what God had that they didn't have. And God denied it to them in their creation because it was bad for them, but they still wanted it and grasped for it themselves. So, yes? Maybe. Well, the thing is, I don't think we had a command about that uncut stone thing yet. That'll come up other places. I was just bringing it up as a biblical idea. That's, yeah, but yeah, so they're building this thing maybe to try and reach heaven on their own. And God's reaction to this might seem very childish if we don't understand it properly. So we're going to get into God's reaction to this here in a minute. I would say the very best you could imagine if they're thinking reaching heaven is, well, this way they have access to God, But throughout Scripture so far, nobody has ever had to go up to God because God comes down to them. And he has been this whole time, right? He did it with Adam and Eve. He did it with Cain and Abel. He did it with Noah, right? God is coming down to be with his people. Watch this. 11 verse 5. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of man had built. You don't need to build a tower to reach God because God comes down to us. This is an important concept for you to understand Christianity. And as we enter into the Advent season very soon, that's why Emmanuel is such a big deal, right? Because nobody ascends to heaven to bring God down. We have a God. In many religions, the goal is for you to make of yourself someone who ascends, right? So if you think about, let's use Hinduism as an example, because I think it's a good one because of the clarity of the idea here. In Hinduism, to reach the highest godhood, you need to become a better and better person, right? Accruing less and less spiritual debt over your life until you've sort of reached a positive balance. And then you ascend to union with, I'm using Christian language here, but to union with the God energy, right? A Hindu would talk about that as the Brahman, like the source of all things. And you can almost chart it, right? Like, well, when I was reincarnated, was I reincarnated low on the ladder or high on the ladder? And if I do a good job, maybe next time I'll be higher still, right? So this idea is that it is the responsibility of the person to try and work their way up to ascension. But you see this in all kinds of religions. I mean, it happens all over the place. Any place where the emphasis is on your personal growth and development. Christianity does not work that way. And I'm going to use Christianity even though we're talking about the Old Testament, right? Because many people who had this Old Testament couldn't see what was always there. And that's why it's so important that Christ comes and doesn't just give a new message. He's constantly opening the scriptures to them so that they can see what was there the whole time. But our instincts as a person is hierarchy and personal ascension, personal growth, right? I have to reach up. So God comes down to see what they are doing. Could he not see from heaven? Of course he could. That's not the point. Verse 6. And the Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. No kidding. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language so that they may not understand one another's speech. Now, if you read this as an immature person with a feeble understanding of who God is, it is very easy to read this as God is scared of what people are going to do. It is easy to think that this is, Friedrich Nietzsche said, God is dead and we've killed him, right? And it would be easy enough to think that this is what this is. God afraid that people, through their personal development, will overthrow him. I don't think that's what's going on here at all. You tell me, do you think their tower is actually going to reach heaven? No. We've had rocket ships go to the moon. Still didn't get there, right? By the way, rocket ships went to the moon. Okay, moving along. "2025 is such a weird time to live. Do you know what I mean? But, so what is God concerned about? Well, I think he is concerned about what happens to people when we continue on in this same spirit. We continue on in these same endeavors. I am not anti-technology, okay? I'm like the resident AV guy here. Okay, we've got other people who are well-trained, but like I'm not against technology. But having said that, I want you to think this through. Most, I can't say all, I don't think I can say all, but most technologies, and certainly the more powerful the technology, the more true this is, are created with the idea of promoting good, and almost all of them, in one way or another, have led to human suffering. The same sword that defends your home can be wielded by the people invading, right? I mean, golly, do y'all remember when there was a terrorist attack during one of the marathons, Boston Marathon, I think? They used pressure cookers as their bombs. Like, cell phones make communication very convenient. They also make communication cheap. And how often where it used to be a well thought out letter that you had to sit with and maybe do a couple drafts on before you have the gumption to put a stamp that you paid for on it and put it in the mail, been replaced by a text that you dashed off in emotions in 3 seconds or less. And after you hit send, you wish you could unsend it. I'm not saying that cell phones are bad per se. I have one. But that same technology that's meant to connect also fractures relationships. Was the internet a net positive? I don't know. Was social media a net positive? I think probably not. And I stand before you today, possibly on the brink of a bigger revolution than the internet or social media, as all anybody can talk about everywhere you go is artificial intelligence. And you got to ask, what is this for? And is it making life better or not? I was around a conversation. It was happening between two people in front of me. Socially, I was supposed to be there, right? I wasn't the star of the show in that moment, which is so weird for me with I'm the microphone guy. And they were talking about what AI was doing for them in their jobs. And one guy was like, yeah, we saved $70,000 this year because they laid off a department. And is that good? I don't know. But I have deep concerns because there are some people who are saying it will be the end of the world. And there are other people who say it's the salvation of mankind. It'll figure out how to solve our problems for us. And of those two, I know which one's more likely, but I'm not sure either but whether or not it delivers on those promises, it is an idol. Because where people should be looking to God to solve their problems, they're building something out of bricks that they're hoping will reach heaven. And look, I'm going to be honest with you. I believe wholeheartedly that there are people this morning standing up in a pulpit preaching something that ChatGPT gave them. It makes me angry. And if you're one of those pastors and you're watching me right now, I said it. Because what should be happening is when you sit down to faithfully prepare to deliver the word to God's people, you should be asking God, not constructing prompts. You should pray. So I think this is important for us as there's a steep curve of technological advancement and reliance. And every step along the way, I think the people of God should not be saying, is this technology good or bad? Because almost always it's a mixed answer, right? Are microwaves good or bad? I don't know. I think that our ability to cook probably plummeted a little bit, but convenience went up. I don't know. But I think what we should be asking is, what am I hoping this is going to do? Am I hoping this is going to do something that is God's job? So, back to the text. I hope I haven't just ranted and raved too much of just my own thoughts here. I hope I'm being guided into kind of applying this text to our modern world. Let's get back to the text. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. I already talked to you about what I think is in this, which is to say, people were turning a blind eye to the beautiful created world that God gave them because they were so focused on what they were making with their own hands. Um, and so God, in a sort of firm way, if you'll pardon the analogy, he told his kids, turn off the video games and go outside. I will unlock the door at dinner. Right? But I mean, for real. You know, it's easy to obsess about those things that we make with our own hands when, in fact, there's a whole world out there. And when we're focused on what we're doing with our own hands, then it's all here. And that same spirit that was in Lamech that led to the flood is propagating all over again. And guess what? In 2025 AD, the world's full of people who are looking inward and want to glorify themselves. And it's been true in every generation. And I think much like the Tower of Babel, perhaps now people have more and more powerful tools to do it. The instinct has always been there. And I think that we're just enabling ourselves to do it more and harder and faster and bigger, right? So as God's people, we need to be careful that our lives are not pointed at glorifying ourselves. Or even, you know, we built this nice church building that we get to share. We have this identity, this mission, Liberty Hill, but all of that must be in service to glorifying God. It can't be about glorifying us, right? So the Lord dispersed them over the face of the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore, its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. One more thing I want to highlight for you, and I have just a couple minutes to do this. Because they were aimed at themselves, God scattered them. Something interesting happens on Pentecost. Do you remember? We've got people from all over the world gathered in Jerusalem, and the disciples go up to preach, and what happens? Everybody can understand each other. And I'm unclear from the Bible whether that's because, Peter was speaking Swahili, or if the guy who speaks Swahili heard, Peter saying whatever Peter's saying in Aramaic or whatever, but he hears it. I don't know if the translation's happening, in the ears or in the mouth. I don't know. I don't care. The net effect is the same. Because it is not, what are they hearing though? What are they hearing in their own language? That's the important thing. What are they hearing in their own language? Yeah, they're hearing the word of God. They're hearing the testimony of Jesus Christ. They're hearing the gospel. See, the unification over glorifying ourselves is going to lead to ruin. But as I've told you before, I don't believe that our God is natively a God of destruction or chaos. And so for God to confuse their language, that's not like the way he wants to work. The only unity that points itself toward life, ultimately, is the unity we have in Christ. And through Christ, we actually can be united. All nations, languages, tribes, skin tones, whatever. Like in Christ, we are all brought together under his headship. And that's good. As opposed to this, which is about ego and glorification of self, and ultimately will lead to hell on earth. As opposed to what the church is meant to be, which is a manifestation of the kingdom of heaven on earth. All right, I guess that's it. 9:49. That's a good run. I have ranted and raved a lot this morning, but hopefully you got something good out of it today. We will, I guess, next week. We will not have Bible study next week. Next week is fellowship. So you're going to show up here for some donuts and what are the ones with the sausage called? That's the one. Yep. something persnickety. That's right. And then we'll have church next week as well, and we'll be kicking off the season of Advent. So pretty excited. I'll mention it later on, but just mark your calendars. This Wednesday, we have our Thanksgiving Eve service. It's gentle, it's good. Sometimes I know there's some chaos as we're preparing for Thanksgiving. This will be a nice breath of fresh air, nice way to get centered on the goodness of God before you go back and finish your sweet potatoes or whatever, right? So 9:50, you got 10 minutes, go freshen up your coffee, what you need to do, and come on back.